Thank you very much indeed, Francis. Well, Greenpeace Africa has slammed China for its 33 billion rand loan to Eskom to develop the Kusile coal-fired power station. In a statement, Greenpeace said it was disappointed that China would choose to support dirty coal in a country like South Africa, especially in view of its strengthening leadership on climate change. Joining us in studio is Greenpeace Africa Senior Political Advisor Happy Khambule. Happy, thank you very much indeed for your time. I guess the big question is, why is this loan getting you rather hot under the collar?
Well, for various reasons. The most important one is that we are pumping a large debt back into something that should have been completed a long time ago. Other than that fact, the world is moving away from coal. And this debt which we have incurred, or rather this loan that we got, should have been used for renewable energy, should have been used for something which is more progressive and looking forward. And with China taking the stance that it has taken in the international community, it seems like doublespeak, looking at the fact that coal is the key contributor to climate change.
Tell us about China's stance. We know what's happening in areas like Beijing, the air quality in Beijing, but what is China doing differently now?
Well, it's investing a lot more than most developed as well as developing countries in renewable energies. I mean, in the past few years, we've seen an accelerated investment in renewables from wind to solar. And in fact, looking at the different technologies that they've been investing in, renewables energy in their country is far higher a proportion of the investments that are there. However, when we look into outside of where China is in terms of territories in Africa and in other developing countries, they seem to be sponsoring and funding dirty projects.
So you reckon Eskom needs to clean up its act? You are proposing alternative measures, renewables. Practically, though, if they move away from coal, what's the alternative?
The alternative is correctly that, renewables. I mean, we've seen the atmosphere as well as the appetite for renewable energy to be deployed at an accelerated pace in South Africa. I mean, for quite some time, we thought that you couldn't deploy renewables within a short period of time, and that has been proven to be wrong. I mean, we've seen the renewable energy power producing program. We've seen that even households are able to deploy this. But the problem is that Eskom in itself has not been able to participate in deploying renewables. And this loan could have been that step that put Eskom in the field to be able to deploy renewables.
If they do deploy renewables, how's it going to affect South Africans' pockets?
Well, that's the complexity of the issue, because our tariffs are set up in such a way that the current model of renewable deployment is a pass-through 100% to consumers. But if it was something that Eskom were doing, then the revenue pass-through would be far less, because it will be encompassing a lot of other issues such as the transmission and the distribution. And these wouldn't be necessarily a pass-through, it will be aggregated to all consumers.
Let's look at the Kusile power station, the coal power station. I see here they're using something called dry cooling technology, which ultimately will mean using less water. State-of-the-art technology, which will mean better air quality. I guess a step in the right direction.
A step in the right direction. When you look at it, think about 10,000 liters of water to generate maybe a kilowatt of energy, right? Versus 9,000 liters of water to generate the same amount of energy. That's not really a big step. What we're talking about is totally removing the need for water to be used within the electricity sector, or at least at a minimum. And on top of that, the externalities of particulate matter and emissions would be totally removed. So we shouldn't be investing in something that is causing a problem. We are just sinking money into an issue which is causing more problems.
In terms of a time frame, if Eskom have to move away from coal, how can they change this quickly?
Well, we're getting the IRP very soon, the Integrated Resource Plan, which could theoretically mandate that Eskom also participates in deploying renewables. So that could happen as soon as we get the Integrated Resource Plan. So that could be at the end of the year, that could be beginning of next year. But the deployment of renewables is so quick that we could get the first Eskom renewable project, which is not the ones which they built under the World Bank loan, but the new ones which will be feeding at a higher rate probably in the next 2 years.
But isn't that expensive at this stage?
No. We are at a stage where, as I said, like with China taking such an extreme role, a leadership role in the international community, as well as other countries, developed countries, who have participated in renewable energy development earlier on, the prices have reduced so much that they're already competing way below than what Eskom is producing for coal right now.
So you reckon the Eskom's business model is not sustainable? What's your advice to them?
Well, I'm not the only one who thinks that. I think a lot of commentators, a lot of analysts have been saying that the business model needs to change, either unbundling or making sure that the system operator removes itself from the monopoly structure, or in this case, which is more an environmental concern, changing the technology. Because the status of Eskom and the importance of Eskom cannot be understated. We still need Eskom, but it needs to change the manner in which it generates electricity.
How do you plan, how does your organization plan to hold them accountable and put pressure on them in order to change?
I mean, we've been engaged with Eskom for quite some years now. We're looking at the tariff methodologies that have been used by NERSA to determine our tariffs. We're looking at the different air quality matters which they're using. We're looking at the IRP, which is the Integrated Resource Plan. So there's a plethora of avenues that we're engaging Eskom on, but the message still remains the same, that we need to transition away from coal. We need to remove ourselves from this dependency into something that's more future-oriented.
Break it down on an environmental level. The continuous use of coal, what is it doing to the environment?
Well, the most apt implication for using coal is that water, it uses a lot of water, and that means that there's less water for people and other industries.
And we live in a
water-scarce
scarce country.
Obviously, and it means that if we were to have a drought again, like we did in this region a few years ago, we would have far more less water if we continue using more coal. But at the same time, there's particulate matter which is happening at a local level where people are breathing in really hazardous materials and hazardous gases into their lungs. And these places are always, by any measure, when we do measurements, are always the most highly polluted areas. Obviously, it will get even worse if more power stations come on board. And the situation is getting worse due to the fact that the smog is getting heavier, and as well as the housing that we have right now and the types of coal that we're using is of a low quality, even indoor pollution. But the other consequence, which is even of a worse kind, is the climate change angle, which is essentially that every time we're using coal, we are emitting a greenhouse gas and various other greenhouse gases other than just carbon emissions. And this is causing this effect that we have right now, where extreme weather events are more erratic. Like right now, we had a really drastic drought, and we were recovering from that drought, and then suddenly Cape Town has a drought, or rather the Cape region has a drought. And that's not the end of it. Then there's floods. We remember we had water bombs in this area, and OR Tambo was flooded. Regions, some areas were reporting weird weather events. All of these are as a result, not only just because of Eskom, but of the global community using a particular fuel. So why would we want to continue doing something that is causing so much problems?
Just before I leave you, we've got the BRICS nations here present. What's your impressions in terms of their climate change strategies?
Individually, some of the countries are quite progressive. I mean, but as a bloc, BRICS doesn't talk on climate change as a bloc. It talks on climate change in the inverse, in the sense that they speak on energy and other issues of infrastructure development. But South Africa, China, Brazil, and India have tried their best to participate within the international community by reducing their emissions. Countries like Russia, which have previously been industrialized, have started to take a step back, trying to make sure that the other countries, which are developing countries, also play their part. So everybody's taking part, but we cannot be investing in the very same thing that's causing the problem we're trying to solve. We're sinking money in a problem causing technology.
Happy, appreciate your insight there. Happy Khambule is the Senior Political Advisor at Greenpeace Africa.